A fist hammered against a wooden door hard enough to rattle the hinges. Then again. Then a boot slamming low near the lock. Inside, a woman pressed her back flat to the wall and held her breath. An old dog stood between her and the door, growling deep in his chest. The knob twisted, once, twice. A man's voice came through the wood, low and calm, and that calm was worse than any shout. He said he only wanted to talk. He said he'd driven a long way. The woman's hands were shaking. Her name was Delia Marsh, and she had moved to this town for one reason: to make sure this exact night never happened. She'd drawn the blinds. She'd told no one. And still, somehow, he had found her. So what does a woman do when running wasn't enough? The answer lived right next door. Stay with me. Let me take you back a few weeks, to the day Delia Marsh left the city for good. She drove out of Phoenix at 4 in the morning when the freeways were empty and nobody was watching. Everything she owned in the world fit in one suitcase in the trunk. And in the passenger seat sat Buckshot, her gray-muzzled pit bull, 13 years old, half blind in one eye, snoring with his big head on the armrest. He was the only family she had left that hadn't turned on her. Delia was a nurse. 19 years of it. She could read a monitor in the dark, hold a stranger's hand while they died, stay calm when everyone else in the room was falling apart. She was good in a crisis. That was the thing people always said about her. Delia's rock solid. Delia never panics. But here's the thing they didn't know. For 6 years, the biggest crisis in her life had been sleeping in the same bed as her. His name was Cole. And Cole was the kind of man who never left a bruise where a uniform wouldn't cover it. He was careful like that, smart. Everyone loved him. That was the worst part. When she finally tried to tell people, they looked at her like she'd lost her mind, because Cole was a police officer. A good one, they said. A hero, even. He'd shaken half the town's hands. So when Delia finally ran, she didn't go to the police. She couldn't. The police were his brothers. The police answered his radio calls and drank his coffee and believed every word out of his mouth. Running to them would have been like running straight back into his arms. She picked a place off the map. Copper Hollow, Arizona. A wide spot in the desert 2 hours from anywhere, with one gas station, one diner, and a couple dozen rental houses baking in the sun. She paid cash. She used her maiden name. She told the landlord she was a traveling nurse, which was almost true, and she gave him a phone number she'd bought at a drugstore. The rental was small and plain, and it was perfect. A little block house at the dead end of a gravel street, with a chain-link fence around a patchy yard for Buckshot. She kept the blinds down day and night. She parked her car around the back where the road couldn't see it. And every time an engine slowed anywhere near her street, her whole body went stiff, and she'd stand there behind the blinds with 2 fingers holding one slat down, just watching, just waiting. Now you'd think a woman that's scared wouldn't have moved in next to what she moved in next to. But she didn't know, not at first. The house on her left had a gravel drive and a big steel gate and a garage that stayed shut. The first night, around 10 o'clock, she heard it. A Harley. Not a nice, clean Harley. A big, battered, rumbling thing that sounded like it had been rebuilt with a hammer. It rolled up the neighbor's drive, coughed twice, and went quiet. And then she heard boots on gravel, slow and heavy, and the clank of that steel gate. She peeked, and what she saw made her stomach drop. A big man, older, gray in the beard, arms like fence posts, wearing a worn leather vest with patches all over the back. She couldn't read them in the dark, but she didn't have to. She knew that shape. She knew what those patches meant. She'd stitched up enough men in enough emergency rooms to know a 1%er when she saw one. This was the boss of the local Hell's Angels charter, and he lived 15 feet from her bedroom window. Delia sat down on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinets and put her hand on Buckshot's neck, and she almost laughed because it wasn't funny at all. She'd run from one dangerous man, and she'd landed right next door to another one. That's what she believed. And believe me, she had every reason to. The man never smiled. He never waved. He came home every night on that Harley, and sometimes 3 or 4 other bikes came with him, and there'd be low voices in his yard and the orange dots of cigarettes and long silences. She stopped letting Buckshot out after dark. She learned the big man's name from a package the mail carrier left on the wrong porch. Rune Kessler. She said it out loud once, just to hear it, and it sounded like a warning. For 2 weeks, she lived like a ghost between 2 men she was afraid of. And she told herself over and over that piece this cheap couldn't possibly be real. She was right about that, but not the way she thought. Here's where it turns. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon, hot as a furnace. Delia was inside charting a shift she'd picked up at the county clinic 2 towns over when she realized the house was too quiet. No jingle of tags, no old dog snoring. She called for Buckshot and got nothing. She went out back and her heart just stopped. There was a gap under the chain link where the ground had washed out, and it was dog-shaped and it was empty. Buckshot was gone. Now understand, this dog was half blind and slow and 13 years old, and out past that fence was open desert and a road where trucks ran too fast. Delia forgot every rule she'd made for herself. She forgot the blinds and the hiding and the careful quiet. She ran out the front in her socks, yelling his name, and she stopped dead in the middle of the gravel road, because she'd found him. Buckshot was sitting on Rune Kessler's front porch, and Rune Kessler was crouched down next to him, this enormous leather-vested biker, holding a chipped bowl of water while her old dog drank from it like they were old friends. Delia's whole body locked up. Every part of her screamed to grab the dog and run. But she couldn't make her feet move because a bigger fear was drowning that one. The fear of what a man like this might do if she came at him wrong. Rune looked up at her. He had a heavy, weather-beaten face, and eyes that didn't give away one single thing. "Yours," he said. That was it, one word. "Yes," she managed. "I'm so sorry." He got under the fence aisle. "I'll fix it." Rune stood up slow, his knees popping, and he looked down at Buckshot and then back at her. "Fence washed out on the east corner," he said. "Ground soft there. I got some cinder block. Fix it in 10 minutes if you want." She didn't know what to say. She'd braced for a threat and gotten an offer to fix her fence. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said, and he handed her the bowl. That night Delia lay awake going over every second of it. The way the dog had leaned into him. The way he hadn't asked a single question. Not her name, not where she came from, not why a woman living alone kept her car hidden around the back. Most men asked questions. Cole had asked questions all the time, and every one of them had been a trap. This man hadn't asked anything. The next morning there were 3 cinder blocks stacked neatly against the washed-out corner of her fence, and the gap was packed tight with gravel and dirt. She never heard him do it. She never even saw him. He'd just come in the night and fixed it and left. Over the next few days, something in Delia loosened, just a little. She caught herself lifting the blinds an inch higher. She let Buckshot lie in a patch of sun by the front step. She waved at the mail carrier. On the 4th day she baked a pan of cornbread, because that's what her grandmother did to thank a neighbor, and she stood at Rune's steel gate for a full minute working up the nerve before she left it on his step and hurried away like a kid ringing a doorbell. That evening he set the empty pan on her porch, washed clean, with a folded scrap of paper on top. 3 words in blocky handwriting. "Good cornbread, thanks." And Delia Marsh smiled. A real one. First one in longer than she could remember. She sat on her front step in the cooling dark with her old dog's head on her knee, and for the first time since Phoenix, she let herself believe it. Maybe she'd actually made it. Maybe the running was over. Maybe this quiet, strange little town at the end of a gravel road was going to be where she finally got to just breathe. She had no idea that 2 streets over, a truck she didn't recognize had already circled the block 3 times that day. She woke the next morning feeling almost human. She made coffee. She hummed. She opened the front blinds all the way, and the desert light poured in, and it felt like the first day of the rest of her life. Then she went out to her car and stopped. There was a piece of paper tucked under her windshield wiper. She thought it was an ad or a note from the landlord. She pulled it out and unfolded it. It was a single sentence, in handwriting she knew better than her own. Handwriting that had signed her birthday cards and her marriage license, and once a hospital form saying she'd fallen down the stairs. "You look good with the blinds open, D." The coffee cup slipped out of her other hand and shattered on the driveway. He was here. Cole was here. He'd stood at her car in the night, close enough to touch it, close enough to touch her front door, and he'd wanted her to know it. Because that was the game. It was never just about hurting her. It was about making sure she understood that there was nowhere on earth she could go where he couldn't reach out and put his hand on her throat whenever he pleased. And here's the part that turned her blood to ice water. She couldn't call for help. Because who do you call when the man hunting you carries a badge? She pictured it. A patrol car pulling up. A young deputy stepping out and Cole's voice already in his ear over the radio, calm and friendly and full of concern, saying, "Oh, her, yeah, I know all about her. She's not well. She makes things up." She had lived that nightmare before. She knew exactly how it ended. It ended with her looking crazy and him looking like a saint, and then it ended with the two of them alone again after everyone drove away. This was not the same fight anymore. It had changed shape entirely. Before, it was a woman trying to disappear. Now it was a woman trapped in a town, hunted by a man the law would protect, and she had no badge, no lawyer, no family, and no way to prove a single thing. She was completely, utterly alone. Or so she thought. And that's exactly what I want you to hold on to, because that's the whole heart of this story. So if you've made it this far and you want to see how it turns out, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps, and trust me, you don't want to miss what this quiet neighbor does next, because Delia wasn't as alone as she thought. She spent that whole day behind locked doors, shaking, watching the street through the blinds like she used to. And late in the afternoon, she saw it. A dark gray pickup, dusty, out-of-town plates, rolling slow past the end of her street. It slowed even more as it passed her house. Then it drove on. 20 minutes later, it came back the other way, slow again. She wasn't the only one who saw it. Across the gravel, Rune Kessler was standing in his open garage with a wrench in his hand and grease on his forearms. And he watched that gray truck roll past for the second time, and he went very still. He didn't wave. He didn't stare. He just quietly clocked the plate, the make, the way it slowed, the way a man behind the wheel turned his head toward the little block house at the end of the road. Rune had spent 40 years reading men. He knew a predator circling a den when he saw one. And he knew that the scared woman with the old dog and the good cornbread had not moved to the end of a dead-end street in the middle of nowhere by accident. That night when Delia finally worked up the courage to crack her door and let Buckshot out to do his business, Rune was sitting on his own front step in the dark, elbows on his knees, a bottle of water beside him. He didn't get up. He didn't come over. He just said, across the quiet in that low gravel voice, "You all right over there?" And Delia, who never told anyone anything, who had learned that telling only ever made it worse, stood in her doorway and felt something crack open in her chest. Maybe it was the dark. Maybe it was how tired she was. Maybe it was that he'd never once asked her a question until now. "No," she said, "not really." Rune nodded slow, like that was the answer he'd expected. "That gray truck," he said. "You know it." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "It's my husband, my ex-husband," she swallowed. "He's a cop back in Phoenix. That's why I can't. That's why there's nobody I can call." For a long moment Rune didn't say anything at all. Crickets. The far-off whine of a truck on the highway. Then he stood up, and he picked up his water bottle, and before he went inside he said one thing. "Nobody's touching you on this street." He didn't say it loud. He didn't say it like a threat or a boast. He said it the way another man might say the sun's coming up tomorrow. Just a plain fact about how the world worked. And for the first time in 6 years, Delia Marsh believed a man when he told her she was safe. 3 nights later, Cole came. It was past midnight. Delia was awake because she was always awake now. She heard the engine first, the gray truck, rolling up her gravel street with the headlights off. It stopped in front of her house. A door opened and shut, soft. And then the footsteps came up her walk, and the fist came down on her door, and that low, calm, terrible voice came through the wood. "Delia, open the door, I just want to talk." She backed against the wall. Buckshot planted himself between her and the door, hackles up, growling from somewhere deep. The knob twisted, once, twice. Then the boot came, slamming low near the lock, and the whole frame jumped, and she knew the cheap little door wasn't going to hold. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands, and she almost dialed the number that would send Cole's own brothers to laugh in her face. Then she stopped, and instead she did the only thing that made sense in a world gone upside down. She sent one text, to the drugstore phone number she'd traded with the biker next door 2 nights before, when he'd fixed her porch light without being asked. 3 letters, help. The boot hit the door again. Wood cracked around the lock. Delia scrambled backward into the corner of her kitchen, pulling Buckshot with her, and the door burst open, and there he was, Cole, filling the doorway, handsome, calm, smiling that smile that never reached his eyes. Off duty in plain clothes, but she could see the shape of the pistol under his jacket, because he never went anywhere without it. "There she is," he said softly, stepping inside, glass crunching under his boots. "You have any idea how far I drove, all the trouble you put me through?" He shook his head slow, disappointed, like she was a child who'd wandered off. "Get your things, we're going home." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Delia said, and her voice shook, but she said it. First time she'd ever said it to his face. Something flickered across Cole's expression, and the smile went away, and she saw the real thing underneath, the thing only she had ever been allowed to see. He took a step toward her, one hand coming up, and that's when the whole doorway went dark. Rune Kessler filled it, and behind him, spilling across her little front yard in the moonlight, were the others. 4 of them, 5. Big men in leather, silent, spread out, blocking the truck, blocking the road, blocking every way out. They didn't shout. They didn't rush in. They just appeared the way a wall appears, and stood there. Cole spun around, and for 1 second, one beautiful second, Delia watched the calm drain right out of her ex-husband's face. "Who the hell are you?" Cole snapped, and his hand drifted toward his jacket, toward the gun. "I'm a police officer. You people are interfering with." "We know what you are," Rune said. He stepped inside, slow, and he wasn't a big man in a doorway anymore. He was a mountain in a small kitchen. "Take the hand away from the jacket." Cole didn't. His fingers found the grip. And Rune moved faster than any man that size had a right to. One huge hand closed over Cole's wrist and pinned it flat, and the other came up under his jaw, not squeezing, just resting there, heavy as a promise. Cole was strong. Cole worked out. Cole was used to being the most dangerous thing in any room, and he couldn't move an inch. "You drove a long way," Rune said, quiet, his face inches from Cole's. "So listen close, because I'm only saying this once. That woman behind me, she's got a whole street now. You understand what I'm telling you. You didn't come here and find one scared girl alone at the end of a road. You came here and walked into my house." He tightened just slightly. "And that was a real bad idea." 2 of the others came in and took the gun off Cole, easy, like taking a toy from a kid. One of them, a wiry old boy with a white beard, popped the magazine, cleared the round, and set the empty weapon on Delia's counter without a word. "You can't do this," Cole said, but his voice had gone up half an octave and the calm was gone, all of it. "I'm a cop. I've got people. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Rune almost smiled. "Funny," he said. "I was about to say the same thing to you." Now here's the thing you have to understand about men like Rune Kessler. They don't get where they are by breaking bones in a woman's kitchen and leaving a mess. They get there by being smarter and colder and more patient than the man across from them. And Rune had spent 3 days getting ready for exactly this. He nodded at the white-bearded man who stepped forward holding up a phone, filming, the little red light steady. "Say hi," Rune told Cole. "You're on camera, have been since you kicked that door. We got you breaking and entering. We got you pulling a firearm on a man in his neighbor's home. We got your plate, your truck, your face, and about 6 of us who'll swear to every second of it." He leaned in. "You're not the only one who knows how the law works, son. You just made it real easy to use it against you." Cole's mouth opened and nothing came out. "Now," Rune went on, "here's how tonight goes. You're gonna walk out to that truck. You're gonna drive back to Phoenix, and you're never gonna come within 100 miles of Copper Hollow again. Because if you do, this video finds its way to your captain, to internal affairs, to every newspaper in Maricopa County, and to every single one of us." He let go of Cole's jaw, slow. "And some of us don't much care about cameras." He stepped back and gave Cole just enough room to move toward the door. Cole stood there breathing hard, humiliated, his empty gun on the counter, 6 men watching him, and for the first time in his life he was the smallest thing in the room. He looked at Delia, and whatever he saw in her face, it wasn't the frightened girl he'd driven all that way for. She was standing up straight. Her old dog was pressed against her leg. And she was looking back at him without one drop of fear. "Dee," he started. "Don't," she said. "Don't ever call me that again." Cole walked out. The bikers parted just enough to let him through and closed up again behind him. He got in his truck, and Copper Hollow watched a police officer from Phoenix drive away down a gravel road at 1 in the morning with his tail between his legs, filmed the whole way by an old man with a white beard and a steady hand. The gray truck's taillights disappeared over the rise, and the whole street just stood there in the dark, listening, until the engine faded to nothing. Nobody cheered. That's not how it went. It was quieter than that. The men stood around in the yard for a while, the way men do after something serious, not saying much. One of them fixed the broken doorframe right then and there, at 1 in the morning, with a screwdriver from his saddlebag and a spare block of wood, humming to himself. Another swept up the shattered coffee cup and the splinters. The white-bearded one saved the video to 2 different phones and a little drive he wore around his neck, because Rune had taught him that a thing worth having was worth having twice. Delia sat down on her front step because her legs finally gave out, and she started to cry. Not the scared crying she'd done for 6 years. The other kind. The kind that comes out of you when a weight you've carried so long you forgot it was there just lifts clean off your back. Buckshot climbed halfway into her lap, all 70 pounds of him, and licked the salt off her face. Rune came and sat down next to her on the step, leaving a careful arm's length of space between them, and he handed her his bottle of water without a word. She drank. Her hands were still shaking, but they were slowing down. "He'll try again," she finally said. "You don't know him, he doesn't quit." "He'll think about it," Rune said, "and then he'll remember tonight." He looked out at the dark road. Men like that, they only understand one thing. They understand meeting something bigger and colder than they are. He met it tonight. He'll dream about this street for the rest of his life. He took the water back and had a swallow. "But you're right, just in case. Couple of the boys are gonna take turns parked up the road for a while. You won't even see 'em. And that video goes to a lawyer friend of mine in the morning. gets filed nice and legal, so it's not just a saying it. It's on paper. Delia looked at him. This weather-beaten man she'd been so afraid of. The boss of a motorcycle club she'd been sure would be the second dangerous thing to ruin her life. "Why?" she asked. It came out small. "You don't even know me. Why would you do all this for me?" Rune was quiet a long moment. Then he said, "Had a sister, long time ago, married a man a lot like your husband." He turned the water bottle slow in his big hands. "Nobody stood on her street. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to." Delia understood everything he wasn't saying, and she reached over and put her hand on his forearm, just for a second, and he let her. Cole never came back. For a while, there was a Harley or an old pickup parked up near the top of the gravel road most nights, engine off. Some quiet member of the Copper Hollow charter drinking coffee out of a thermos and watching the dark. Delia would see the orange dot of a cigarette up there, and instead of terror, she'd feel something she hadn't felt in years. She'd feel watched over. There's a world of difference between the two, and she'd forgotten there was until these men reminded her. The lawyer friend was real. The video got filed, along with a sworn statement from 6 men and 1 nurse, and a formal complaint that landed on the desk of Cole's own department. The kind of thing that follows a cop around for the rest of his career, whether it sticks or not. Word came back through the grapevine a few months on that he'd quietly resigned and moved out of state. Delia didn't celebrate when she heard. She just sat with it a while, and then she went and let Buckshot out into the yard, and she left the gate open because she wasn't afraid of what might come down the road anymore. She stopped drawing the blinds. That was the thing she noticed most. One morning she realized she'd left them open all night and slept straight through till dawn, and it hit her that she couldn't remember the last time she'd done that. The desert light came in gold across her floor, and she made her coffee, and she didn't check the street once. She kept nursing at the county clinic. Turned out the Copper Hollow charter had more than a few members who needed patching up now and then, and more than a few who'd never see a real doctor if they could help it. And word got around that the nurse at the dead end would look at a bad hand or a busted rib and not ask too many questions. She fixed the white-bearded man's broken finger one Sunday at her kitchen table. She talked a young rider through quitting the pills that were killing him. She became, in her own quiet way, part of the strangest, gentlest family she'd ever had. Men the whole world had written off as dangerous, sitting on her porch steps eating cornbread, minding their manners, calling her ma'am. And Rune, well, Rune still didn't say much. He still rode that battered Harley home every night, and he still never smiled easy, and he still fixed things on her house without ever mentioning he'd done it. She'd find a mended gate, a patched roof, a new bulb in the porch light, and she'd know. Some evenings they'd sit on the step together in the dark, the old dog between them, not needing to fill the quiet with words. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't loud, and it wasn't like anything in the movies. It was just 2 weather-beaten people who'd both learned the hard way what the world could do, sitting close, keeping watch over one small stretch of gravel road. Buckshot lived another 2 good years. When he finally went, in his sleep, in a patch of sun by the front step, Rune dug the grave himself. Out by the fence corner he'd fixed the day everything started, and he stood next to Delia while she said goodbye and didn't say a word, because by then she knew that his saying nothing was the loudest way he had of saying he was there. Remember how this started. A fist on a door in the dark. A woman with her back to the wall, sure she was alone, sure that peace this cheap couldn't be real, sure she'd traded one dangerous man for another. She'd had it exactly backwards. The dangerous man was the one with the badge, the one everybody trusted. And the safe place, the place she finally got to breathe, was right next door, behind a steel gate, with a battered Harley in the drive and a man in a leather vest who fed her old dog from a chipped bowl, and never asked a single question he didn't need the answer to. Delia Marsh ran to the edge of the map to disappear, and instead, at the end of a dead gravel road in the middle of the Arizona desert, she got found. Not by the man who hunted her, by the ones who decided without being asked that nobody was ever going to touch her on their street again. And they never did.